Classical microeconomics relies on a baseline premise. Competitive markets naturally allocate resources to maximize social welfare. This mathematical harmony requires a perfectly sealed environment, where every single cost and benefit associated with a product is contained entirely within the transaction between the buyer and the seller. In practice, this perfectly sealed system fractures under the pressure of unpriced external factors, spilling over into the broader environment. Because commercial transactions inevitably leak costs onto people who never agreed to bear them, assuming a market is perfectly efficient by default is a dangerous managerial illusion. We call these leaks externalities, costs or benefits generated by a private transaction that force an uncompensated third party to pay the price. Consider an industrial manufacturer emitting heavy pollution. The factory pays for raw materials and labor, but it does not pay for the respiratory issues and environmental degradation forced upon the surrounding community. To understand how to correct this, we have to map the exact mathematical anatomy of this market failure, calculate the specific tax required to realign it, and determine if state intervention is the only viable solution. Spotting a smoking chimney is easy. The actual economic challenge lies in quantifying exactly how much that smoke warps the overall market equilibrium. This chart gives the baseline framework, plotting price against quantity. From the private firm's perspective, we plot downward-sloping demand against the upward-sloping marginal cost private curve. Left alone, the free market settles where these lines intersect, establishing quantity Q1 and price P1. At this specific output level, the manufacturer believes their operation is completely optimized. Their internal ledger balances out, largely because their accounting strictly ignores any environmental damage occurring outside the factory gates. This equilibrium point, Q1, represents a localized state of profitability that actively masks a broader systemic failure. The mathematical reality changes when we chart the unpriced external variable, the marginal cost of pollution. Because the manufacturer evades paying this specific cost, the market price of their product remains artificially low. This dynamic directly incentivizes severe overproduction of the harmful good. To find the true cost of production, we must combine these metrics into a social cost curve. This is the absolute mathematical sum of the private marginal cost and the external pollution cost. The genuine socially optimal equilibrium occurs higher up the graph, precisely at point A, where consumer demand intersects this comprehensive social cost curve. We now see the optimal market quantity is much lower at Q-opt, and the necessary price is significantly higher at P-opt. A competitive market left entirely alone mathematically guarantees the overproduction of harmful goods because its internal cost curves are artificially flattened by unaccounted damage. The immediate policy question for regulators is how to forcefully walk the market backward, shifting production away from the harmful Q1 and realigning it with the optimal Q-opt. We find the required correction by calculating the exact vertical distance between the comprehensive social cost curve and the localized private cost curve at the optimal quantity. This wedge, the distance from A to C, represents the precise mathematical calculation for an optimal Pigouvian tax. Implementing a tax equal to this exact amount physically shifts the firm's operational cost curve upward, naturally dissolving their localized incentive to overproduce. When calculated accurately to match this marginal difference, state taxation acts as a mathematical realignment of private incentives with public welfare, rather than an arbitrary financial penalty. Relying entirely on the state to calculate and enforce this exact A to C tax wedge across an entire global economy is administratively heavy and highly susceptible to error. The Coase theorem offers an alternative theoretical framework, proving that government intervention is not always a strict mathematical requirement to eliminate externalities. This framework functions under two strict parameters. Property rights over the contested resource must be clearly assigned, and the transaction costs of bargaining between the parties must be absolutely negligible. Under these frictionless conditions, the private parties will logically negotiate a financial transfer that exactly internalizes the externality on their own, voluntarily shifting output down to the optimal level without a single state tax. However, this Coasean logic hits severe limits in practice. Bargaining is hampered by incomplete information. massive legal costs, and highly skewed power dynamics that lead to skewed normative outcomes. While private capital negotiations are theoretically more precise, the intense friction of real-world transaction costs often makes state intervention a necessary structural tool. This relationship between state and market also operates in reverse. Starting in the late 1970s, governments intentionally stepped back, aggressively deregulating industries like telecommunications, utilities, and commercial banking. The immediate managerial response to the removal of these protective barriers is massive industry consolidation, as firms scramble to acquire competitors and survive in a newly hostile environment. This rapid consolidation is driven by a single calculus. A merger is only viable if the combined market value of the integrated company mathematically exceeds the sum of their separate standalone valuations. Even in a deregulated environment, state oversight remains active through antitrust enforcement, though philosophies vary wildly. U.S. regulators typically evaluate mergers strictly by their impact on consumer demand, while European authorities often prioritize maintaining supply-side competition. These conflicting philosophies famously clashed in 2001 when American regulators approved General Electric's acquisition of Honeywell, only for European authorities to categorically block the deal, collapsing the merger entirely. Whether calculating the precise tax to curb industrial pollution or halting massive corporate combinations across international borders, the ultimate economic function of the state remains the same, acting as the structural backstop when private markets fail to optimize themselves.